Happy Monday, and welcome to another episode of Cases That Should Have Gone to the Supreme Court of Canada, but didn't. Today, we're talking about battered wife syndrome. Cases that should have gone to the Supreme Court of Canada, but didn't. Deborah Dunenko shot her husband. At trial, she argued that she was justified in killing her husband essentially on the basis of the fact that she was suffering from battered person syndrome, and argued that she should get a lighter sentence as a result of this action that was taken essentially in self-defense. One of the issues that came up at trial was the Crown's use of expert evidence to disprove that she was suffering from the symptoms of battered person syndrome, including through a psychological examination that was done of her. Despite the fact that the Criminal Code sets out obligations for the timelines during which these expert reports have to be delivered, the Crown failed to deliver them to Ms. Dunenko in an appropriate time frame. Nevertheless, the trial judge admitted the expert report and proceeded with the trial in any event. The Court of Appeal upheld the conviction and upheld the trial judge's finding, relying on the expert evidence that there was no battered person syndrome in her case, despite the fact that the Crown had not complied with the time requirements. They found that there was no breach of her right to a fair trial, and that she had every opportunity to bring her own expert evidence because she was advancing what was essentially an affirmative defense. In the circumstances, this case raises a very important issue. If you're advancing an affirmative defense, do you have to provide your expert evidence to Crown prior to them providing theirs to you? And do somehow the provisions of the Criminal Code that relate to the timeliness of Crown disclosing an expert report no longer apply? This has the potential to impact huge numbers of trials across Canada, not just in contexts of domestic violence, but in any context where expert reports are being delivered and where an affirmative defense may be mounted. To truncate those statutory time requirements and say that it has no bearing on trial fairness when it relates directly to the defense being advanced by the person who is facing prosecution for one of the most serious offenses known to law, that's a huge issue of national importance that the Supreme Court of Canada should have heard. And given how significant and pervasive domestic violence is, and how hugely it impacts the victims of domestic violence, making it more difficult for them to take those proactive steps in their cases later on, more difficult to see through the logical needs to get expert evidence, isn't it more consistent with fairness and an approach that considers fairness for the Crown to have to deliver those reports in an appropriate time frame to allow the defense an opportunity to respond? It seems to me that to do otherwise actually perpetuates, to some extent, a cycle of violence against these people, and that can't be fair. That can't be part of a properly administered justice system. The Supreme Court of Canada had the opportunity in this case to consider those implications, and instead, they just didn't. They left it, and they allowed a person who was potentially acting in self-defense to be sentenced as a person who had just committed a murder, as opposed to somebody who had a reason for doing so that is horrendous, but potentially a defense to her actions. In the circumstances, the Supreme Court of Canada missed the opportunity to hear this case and to decide these important issues that can affect people who are in a vulnerable position in our society. And that, unfortunately, is going to have to mean that this is going to happen to somebody else on another day before the Supreme Court of Canada hears the issue. Cases that should have gone to the Supreme Court of Canada, but didn't. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Cases That Should Have Gone to the Supreme Court of Canada but Didn't. I'm Kyla Lee at Acumen Law. Thank you to Brazen Bull Creative for putting these videos together. Like, subscribe, and share with your friends.